Welcome to the Iron Prescription podcast with your hosts, Doctors Lynette and Stuart. We're both GPs and we're both personal trainers, though we do both jobs in very different ways. We chat about the best things you can do for your health and fitness, and along the way, help you to avoid wasting time on the things that really aren't. Thanks for listening. Since we last spoke then, I've done a bit of, work, domestic stuff, made a few dinners. What have you been up to since we last spoke?
So I went to work in Africa.
Okay.
In Kenya for a charity called RedTribe, which work with the Maasai people on a very remote part of the Maasai tribe down by the Tanzanian border, which is 6 hours by road, quickest you can do it to the nearest hospital, 6 hours by road, 40 minutes by air to a proper bush landing strip with very little medical support. Two people, one who they call a clinical officer, who is a partially trained doctor that done 3 years at medical school as opposed to the full 6, and a nurse they're both very generic in their abilities. So these guys take out teeth, they fill teeth, they deal with sepsis, they deal with amputations, they close wounds, they do episiotomies on delivery, they do everything, and they're looking after 15,000 people. And they wanted some westernized medical support and some teaching and learning, and to also understand from a biggest perspective, they wanted to understand what the need was in the community.
But how did you end up doing this? Because I've been to work from home and I don't get these invitations in my emails. So just fill in that gap for me, because I can't quite. I know you've got different roles, but
So we're both GPs, but I'm sort of ultra specialist in that I'm a specialist in remote and hostile environments. So a lot of my work is supporting people in extreme conditions or environments, from working on the air ambulance as a consultant in pre-hospital emergency medicine in the UK. So that's somebody having their worst day of their life and not not necessarily near a hospital or unable to get to hospital alive without significant advanced care, right through to people working in this sort of environment where I'm working with people, supporting people in extreme global conditions. And that might be people on expeditions, it might be people who are working from a Western living perspective, but working there, mining, oil, gas, shipping, or it may be conflict zones. In this case, this was the university that I hold a chair at, were asked by the charity, along with global health partners, to look at what the health needs were of the Maasai in this remote area of Africa. And it's one of the last places of Africa that is still unexplored because of the terrain is so hostile, basically. So, all the outreach clinics that I did and the home visits I did on a motocross bike, because that's the vehicle that can get you there to these patients. Whereas these patients are walking, but I didn't have the time to walk those distances, to go and see them. So, but yeah, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And it was so, it was just a different world altogether. The stuff I've done before, previously with the military, you're very well supported. You've always got backup, you've got huge amounts of resources, and you've always got a rotary asset that you can call upon pretty much all the time, that you can say, right, I need to get out of here.
Rotary asset being...
helicopter,
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, yeah. On the second day, it was a real eye-opener for me, because on the second day, I get on the motocrosser, and I'm 54. I consider myself pretty fit, but I get on the motocrosser and to go to do an outreach antenatal clinic and postnatal clinic, about an hour away of hard riding, and I get on the motocross bike, and I'm really used to bikes and everything, and I get a little bit of chest pain, and I think it's muscular, but then I start working it through my mind, and I'm like, well, it better be muscular, because if
Yeah.
it's not muscular, that's it.
Yeah.
It's over.
Yeah.
Because there is no extraction for me in this situation. And, you can forget daughter cath lab times, because it's just not going to happen. And it was like, wow, it was such an eye opener from that perspective.
Well, you're here and, not
Absolutely.
dead.
It was
So
muscular.
it was muscular, problem solved. But
Yeah.
just so I can picture it, because we haven't spoken about this other than me seeing a few pictures. Are you
Yeah.
driving the motorbike, or are you a
Yes.
passenger? Okay.
No.
How do you
I'm
know where
riding the
you're
motorbike.
going? And how do you know
So,
what do you know about what to expect when you get there, and what's going through your mind in terms of how prepared you are for what might greet you?
yeah, so I have no idea
Mm.
where I'm going. So luckily I have a guide
Right.
who's on another motorbike.
Right.
And I really have no knowledge of what I'm going to. So that's basically through my training. I've done lots of training in the unexpected, urgent and emergency events. So you rely upon your background training to be able to hang a hat on and deal with it. So I've just, my latest qualification, I've just credentialed. There's a new credentialing in the GMC for remote, it's a real mouthful, remote, rural, urgent, unscheduled and unplanned care. So I'm the first doctor in England to get that credentialing. And that takes your general practice and then expands it to what I believe general practice used to be, which were true generalists. I mean, from a general practice perspective, we've been pushed into this ever decreasing funnel of chronic disease management and hospital avoidance, but haven't been given the ability to really use our skills fully in the true generalism like we used to 30, 40 years ago. And then on top of that, obviously, I've done all my exams and everything for consultant in pre-hospital emergency medicine. So that's the very high end of the critical injury and illness perspective, sort of anaesthetic trauma management and surgical intervention if needed.
I guess I'm thinking the closest you might get to that on home soil might be some of the more rural parts of Scotland, where a GP will still have to have all different equipment in their bag, because they may be greeted with something unexpected, especially when you're dealing with farming communities, because
Yeah.
accidents still happen. And probably still parts of, I think Devon and Cornwall still have some quite remote areas. But I mean, we're talking a different civilization,
Oh,
different
absolutely,
language,
absolutely.
lack of
I mean, to be
tarmac on the
fair,
roads.
yeah, to be fair, I'm doing a webinar series for the Royal College of GPs at the moment on being able to deal with acute patients in general practice. Because of the state of the NHS, now in standard urban general practice and you dial 999, you're not guaranteed you're
No.
going to have an ambulance in the time frame that we would expect.
Yeah.
And if you've got somebody who's critically ill and peri-arrest, and that does happen in general practice, you may be with that patient in a city environment 30, 40 minutes, whereas before that would never happen, just because the resources are now so burdened by the lack of capacity in the NHS that all the ambulances are at hospital.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, you're right. But actually, this is a completely different level. It's
Yeah.
off the scale.
Okay. Were you apprehensive, or did you think I can deal with whatever greets me?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit arrogant, but I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't apprehensive. I was still taken aback by what I was seeing and the expectation of this clinical officer and this nurse, and what society in that part of the world expects them to be able to do. And to be honest, they absolutely did. I mean, so going forward on my own time, every Friday, I'm going to do a virtual ward round with the clinical officer and the nurse to catch up on things that they've seen during the last week, if they've got any issues, or if they want to talk through a case, they weren't sure, etc., or they've got anything ongoing. And then I said, contact me if you have anything real emergency that you feel that you're struggling with. So let me just read you the WhatsApp that I received yesterday.
So, and on that, because actually when I showed the photos to the family here, they said, oh, they've got a mobile signal out there, because there are people in literally hots with sticks for the roof. And I'm thinking, hang on, where does the phone and Wi-Fi and 5G signal fit in with all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a sat phone with me, because when I go on these sort of things, I always ensure that I have it's a satellite phone hotspot. So it becomes, I'm always in contact. Mainly, I have it to be in contact with the family. But I've got my sat phone prep gear stuff and everything. And I get there and it is a 5G reception.
That's mad. I can't get that in my village some days.
I know. And the speeds were far better than where I live. And everyone has a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Not in the same way as but all adults have a mobile phone just about. Now that might be a Nokia 88 whatever, brick in your pocket, whatever. But there's a lot of smartphones. There are a lot of smartphones, and these people don't have, and they don't have two halfpennies to rub together. But interestingly, cash has gone.
Oh,
everything is done on mobile banking.
Okay. Wow.
So you literally, it's a slightly different way that we do it here. There's no scan it or anything like that, or Apple Pay per se. If we were there and you said, oh, this is $5, I'd say, well, give me your telephone number. And I go onto an app and I put your telephone number in, and it pays you through the app.
Wow. Okay.
A virtual payment system. Anyway, so I get this yesterday. Hello, doctor. Hope you're doing well. I have a patient, 20 years old, 3 days post-delivery, presenting with history of general body weakness, dizziness, and headache for 3 days. On examination, she is sick-looking with pallor, so pale, plus, temperature of 37.8, a blood pressure of 65/40, a pulse of 160, SATs of 92, a hemoglobin on HemoQ of 7.2.
Oh, God.
And a blood sugar of 8.
Okay.
Your advice, please.
Oh, God. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I wish you hadn't told me that. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. It was, so just to set the picture, it is 5 o'clock in the evening, their time. And so there's no flights. And the closest hospital is 6 hours by land in the day with good light.
Wow.
No ambulances.
Okay, so me receiving that, I'm just standing there useless because I don't have a plan. What did you say?
I said, I'm a bit busy at the moment. I'll get back to you.
That's what I'd have said.
Yeah.
Oh, my phone's not working.
I said they're going to need a blood transfusion. They're symptomatic. Below 8 needs a blood transfusion if they're symptomatic. And I said, just make sure you've got these are accurate readings. And I said, can you start giving some boluses of 250 mils of Hartmann's or normal saline? I think she's probably septic. Is there any evidence of retained products, or is she still bleeding? And have you got any tranexamic acid, oral or intravenous? They didn't have any tranexamic acid. I said, have you got any broad spectrum antibiotics? He came back to me and he said, I've reviewed the results. The blood pressure was slightly better at 97/58, but the pulse had gone up to 170. I said, right, okay. So I said, I'm particularly concerned because she needs fluid resuscitation, but as we give her fluids, we're going to dilute that hemoglobin even further. But we do need to get on top of her pressures. He said, he then came back to me and said, I found some ceftriaxone. I said, give it. So we gave 1 gram of IV ceftriaxone. We poured fluids into her whilst monitoring everything together. We sort of got her more stable. And we did, so we got to a point where we got the blood pressure up to 106/64, but pulse was now 180. So we continued with fluid resuscitation. The other thing was they haven't got an ECG, so I don't know whether this is, so I said, I don't know if this is SVT or AF, atrial fibrillation. So how does it feel at the radial? Of course, she doesn't have a radial. So at the carotid, he couldn't tell because it's so fast. Is it regular or irregular? And, that's fair enough. She didn't have any retained products. She wasn't bleeding. but she was tender in her pelvis, but she had just obviously delivered as well. Baby is completely fine, so there's nothing else going on from that perspective. So we continued on fluid resuscitation, and we did a medical evacuation, and she's alive this morning.
I guess, having been there so recently, I suppose you could picture what they've got access to, because I wasn't necessarily envisaging that they've got access to IV kits to be able to put some fluids in.
Yeah.
So maybe.
But it's random. It's so random of what they have, and that's one of the things that they wanted me to work on is to take away that randomization. And so for example, they've really struggled with doctors going out in the past, because doctors go out in a speciality perspective and are just shocked by everything and very overwhelmed from an anxiety provoking perspective, and then ask for things that are not necessarily. So, for example, they had a nebulizer,
Right.
but they'd got no salbutamol to go in it.
Right. Yeah.
They'd got oral salbutamol tablets, and they got aminophylline, but they hadn't got any inhalers or any liquid salbutamol to go into the nebulizer. So there's lots of random stuff. So you just have to say, have you got, and then work from that perspective, and then work backwards, because there is no sort of like structure in a way that we would expect. I mean, these guys are absolutely excellent, and they know what they've got, but they don't necessarily know what they haven't got, because you don't know what you don't know.
It makes sense. Yeah. Wow. Okay. And where does what they've got, and for context, this is so remote, this setting. So how is what they've got even getting there? Are they relying on charities? Is there any internal structure to provide equipment or a system for healthcare? It's all charity dependent. Wow.
All charity dependent.
Wow.
But there is government provision. But I mean, I'm describing a setup that you must be sitting there and thinking from a governance perspective, from a, if you put a CQC hat on, you're like, oh my word.
I hadn't even got that far, to be honest. Like that.
But if you did, you'd be like, well, this just doesn't meet any type of Western standard or UK standard. And yet this charity was partnered with by the government, because the government had more faith in the charity than it did its own provision.
Right. Okay.
In this remote setting, because they are providing for that community excellent healthcare, given the resources that they've got.
Okay, so that's a very clear picture of what's going on acutely, and life or death stuff, because that is the reality of it. And I guess looking at it from where we are, in our very rich side of the world, we forget about those things because we can afford to, and our system is crippled by chronic disease and diseases of excess. It's probably fair to say excess sitting, excess eating, excess drinking, and all of that, and the family of disorders that brings. Did you see any evidence of anything like that at all?
I saw one obese person.
Right.
And they were an outsider.
Right. Were they in your team?
So I saw one. Yeah, what can I say? I saw one diabetic. They were type 1 diabetes. I saw one. I can't even begin to tell you this. You'd be like, what? Saw one guy with heart failure.
Oh.
And did I send you the picture of me standing on the top of looks like I'm right on the top of a rock that looks out over nothing. That's right at the top of a mountain. These guys, they already live at 2,000 meters, and 2,000 meters altitude is enough to trigger a physiological response to altitude. Okay. Start getting, you can get altitude sickness from 2,000 meters. So it's pretty high. This guy's got heart failure. really bad heart failure. He had crashing heart failure. I've seen his echo. His left ventricular function is not good. Okay, so I'm at the top of that mountain, and he lives in the village, and I'm at the top of that mountain, and his name's Daniel. And I turn around and I'm like, "There's Daniel." I'm like, "All right, Daniel. What?" He says, I'm just out for a walk." I'm like, "Well, did you get a have you got a lift up? It's a Land Rover or something come past?" He's like, "No, I walked." I said, "What do you mean you walked?" I mean, this is an hour's ride on a motocrosser. And he went, "Well, I knew the team were coming up, so I thought I'd take a stroll up here and see you all."
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about a mind perspective that is, I've had patients with heart failure, this level of echo, that would struggle to walk up a hill. And then I realise that Daniel's been walking for so long in his life that he's so fit underneath his heart failure that his legs are working as a secondary pump.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So when he walks,
Yeah.
he actually feels better than the other way round because he's using that muscular pump to move his blood around his system on top of his heart.
Right. How old is Daniel, roughly? Although it can be quite hard to tell in different populations.
Indeed. He's 75.
Okay. Wow. Okay. In terms of age and older population out there, how well do people do? I mean, obviously people die young from trauma and poor access to
Yeah, I haven't
healthcare.
really got to the bottom of this because I met a lot of elders, but I didn't meet a lot of chronically disabled older people. And I haven't got a handle really on what people are dying of because it's only recently that they've started issuing or having to have death certificates. So definitely within the last decade, when somebody died, you covered them in fat and you left them out for the hyenas.
Right. Okay.
And there's no register of what actually killed this person or anything like that. So, but that's changed now. They've got huge amounts of data now that I'm going to trawl through to really understand what's going on here. And also, what I'm really interested in is the advent of a fizzy drink has arrived in the last few years. Alcohol has arrived in the community. Almost zero smoking, but I'll come back to that. But cigarettes are arriving.
Right.
So all the bad things of Western society are going to arrive on this population. So you've got a virgin population that sadly is going to give us a real handle on what happens when you transition that Western diet, that Western lifestyle into a virgin population and what happens to them from an ongoing research, which is terribly sad, but there's nothing I can do to stop that apart from, health education. But, there's lots of reasons why. You can imagine why a can of Coke would be so appealing to somebody who's never drunk it before.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
The other aspect is of what we can learn from, I was talking about the guy with heart failure. They still hunt and they still are hunter-gatherers. So I go out a guy called Tigaran, who is a Maasai warrior, and he's explaining to me how they eat in the bush and stuff like that. And he gets out this bow and arrow, long bow with these arrows, and the arrows are dipped in the root of the arrow tree. Now the arrow tree is really interesting. So you can eat the fruit. And the roots, if you heat the roots up and you make it into a tar, are poison.
Right.
To the point where he tells me a story of one of the young guys, children, who's running with his bow and his arrow, and he stumbles and he scratches himself with the arrow, and he's dead in 6 hours.
Wow.
And there's no antidote.
Right.
And he says it kills you by clotting your blood, which is unusual from a toxin, because normally toxins make you bleed out, or they're a nerve toxin that stops you breathing. But he says that's what happens. And then he explains to me what happens is, okay, so we see an impala, we're going to shoot the impala, but the arrow won't take it down because they're small arrows, and the impala are quite big, they're like deer. The impala will run off. Right. Okay. And impalas are antelopes that have huge range in their ability to run, and they're huge range in their ability to jump. Incredibly fast creatures. These outrun lions.
Right.
Lions have to ambush them. He said, but then we will run down the impala. What do you mean we'll run down the impala? He said, well, we will run until the impala drops with the poison. I was like, and how long is that going to take? He said, well, depends on what the hit is, how much the poison goes in, but maybe 30 kilometers.
Wow.
30 kilometers. So I'm like, okay, so that's like just under 20 miles.
Yes, my commute to work.
Yeah. We're going to run for 20 miles. I'm like, well, I'm not. And then I watch a ceremony which the Maasai are very famous for, and I realise, because they don't train in the morning. They go out for a run. They just go and chase an impala when they need one, and that's not on a regular event, because meat, actually they farm goats and cows. They don't need to necessarily. So this impala is a bit of a treat or whatever. So.
Okay.
They're not out running daily. They walk daily, huge amounts, but they don't run daily. But then they just go, I'm going to go after this impala, and they run 30K. Now, that's a generic global fitness that we don't have in the Western world. Then I see this ceremony the Maasai do, which involves jumping.
Right.
Okay? They jump, vertically jump, up and
On
down,
the spot.
on the spot, up and down, and they do this on a regular basis.
Okay.
And then I look at their Achilles, and their Achilles are thick, real thick. And then I realise, then I watch them run, and they're like running like they're on. Have you ever seen anybody run on those stilts that are like blades?
Oh yes, yeah.
Boing, yeah. Boing, boing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. That's what it's like watching Maasai run.
Wow.
Because they've got this elastic recoil created by jumping alone.
And they're probably barefoot as well.
Yeah, they are. They are barefoot. Yeah. Plus, they live at altitude. So, like I said, at altitude, you get this effect happens where, because as you climb, the oxygen concentration drops. And it's quite significantly, as you go up through the altitude, to the point where if you climb Everest, I know that's extreme, but if you climb Everest, your oxygen saturations are in the 40s.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
People climb Everest all the time. If you and I sat here with Sats in our 80s, we'd be in horrendous respiratory distress. But why aren't these people? Well, what happens is, as you climb, your kidneys release a hormone called erythropoietin, which tells your body, I want you to make more hemoglobin. And I want you to make hemoglobin so that you can carry more oxygen. So these people, so when I said that person had an hemoglobin of 7.2, 7.2 is even more horrendous than you or I have, because it turns out their hemoglobin levels are actually already quite high.
Yeah.
So when it comes to performance on their VO2 max and their overall performance, they are already superior to a European Caucasian who lives at sea level before they even start jumping.
What's interesting about what you're describing is the need for hunting and gathering has moved to one side, but the culture of it has remained so strong that it's still present. If you ever do any reading or watch anything related to the blue zones, which I always find fascinating, for anybody who doesn't know what the blue zones are, they're these 5 regions across the globe where they've got more people that live to 100 years old than anywhere else. And they've been studied to see what patterns are common across these populations. And culture, how they live culturally, is still very, very strong in terms of things that they feel the need to continue as part of their identity. And thankfully, they seem to be linked to healthy behaviours, which other places of the developed world seem to be losing sight of. And it's interesting. I think so much about culture is linked to health, but we don't focus on that enough, really.
So the other thing that they've got, and I'm not going to get into the nuances of this, but they have, everyone has their own perspective, but they have a huge faith.
Right.
That God is with them.
Right.
They're Christians, that Jesus walks with them. And every day they meet as a community, not just on Sundays, but every day. And they talk together about the Bible and they go through the Bible. And the difference I found between this and the Western world, in the Western world, it's a religion. Here, it is a faith. And there is a huge difference with that. So religion is dictated by the society that you live in and is used, in my mind, it is used not always in a good way. But a faith actually has been proven through all the research that if you have a strong faith as part of your life, you are going to live longer, be happier, and have a stronger feeling of worth and community.
And interestingly, the blue zone that is in a part of, I think it's California, are all Seventh Adventist Christians, I want to say. I think I think it's a version of Christianity. So yeah, I've no doubt that there's data to support that. And even when you get into the ritual of fasting that's associated with some religions as well, it's fascinating. So
absolutely,
just going back to the types of diseases and the types of problems. I mean, I know obviously you're there for a relatively short time, and acute stuff, I'm sure, filled the majority of what you're able to see. But did any other things become apparent about the health of the population that you were seeing that we could take? I don't know if lessons is the right word, but I just find it so interesting to contrast what we're taking for granted versus.
There's a lot of, this is interesting. There's a lot of lower GI presentations in children.
Okay.
It's very few in adults.
Right.
They live in these huts that are made by wood, and then when it rains, the women who build the huts, the women are responsible for construction. They go outside and they get cow dung, and they build the walls that are interwoven with the wood, and so the house is basically it's not a mud hut, it's a cow pat hut.
Right.
Okay. And they've used that to make the house. And then the kids are inside, the babies are inside, literally crawling around, picking bits off the wall and putting it into their mouths.
Right. Okay.
And they have upset tummies. There's not a huge amount of GI death or anything like that, but that's one of the, my baby has this.
So they do recognise it as a symptom and a problem.
Yes.
Even though it's quite prevalent.
Yes.
Okay.
So they recognise it as a symptom and problem to a certain degree. So they only present when they're like, well, I'm a bit worried about them because, they're extreme. But it's very, very common.
Right.
But you only see but you don't see it in adults.
Right.
And why is that? Because they've primed their immune system in childhood.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the stuff that Tim Spector, before Zoe became such a big branch of what Tim Spector was doing, he spoke quite a lot about what he'd learned from populations that eat a more natural, I don't want to say natural, but eat off the land.
Varied and off the land diet.
Yeah, and the positive impact that has on their gut as they move through life, because it's able to adapt and diversify in response to what's going in. And I guess that might be that process in motion, because these kids in this tribe aren't eating Pringles,
No.
And Kit Kats. Yeah, interesting.
No. So the other thing that was really interesting, and I can't remember the exact figures, but it's basically this. So carbon monoxide is a gas that is released by burning or inefficient burning from anything really, but you get a lot of carbon monoxide from oil and from wood and coals because it's releasing carbon. It's a single carbon structure that you're released from burning of those products. And it's toxic. It will kill you.
Oh yeah.
Because it binds to hemoglobin irreversibly, and the hemoglobin becomes saturated with that and can no longer carry oxygen.
And that's the bringing the barbecue inside the tent and whole families not surviving because of the barbecue.
Correct. Absolutely perfect example for what I'm about to say. So the UK has a health and safety limit on carbon monoxide particles per million, etc. And it's something like, and I'd have to check these exact numbers, but what is true is the gradient I'm about to tell you. So the UK government sets it at 30 parts per million. The World Health Organization lists it as one of their top 5 causes of illness and disease, and they have a limit of 400. These people, these Maasai people, in their living accommodation, because they burn wood inside to keep warm and to heat water and to cook their food. They have no chimneys. They don't have a chimney system, so it just leaks out the walls and helps to dry the cow dung that's on the walls. Are at 2,500.
Wow.
But they're not dead.
And they're not dead. It's just that gradual adaptation.
So what's going on physiologically?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one of my, so I've brought that back because I'm like, that is golden. From what can we learn from that? Because, what is happening physiologically in these infants, children and adults that are living in this all the time to adapt to not dying. The other thing that's really interesting is they've just, in the last decade on farming, commercialized farming is creeping in, and they're starting to use pesticides. Okay. And they're starting to see pesticides that we use around the world, but they're starting to see that they've never seen before, odd cancers.
Okay.
So I saw a 10-year-old with squamous carcinoma of the oropharynx.
I had one of those on Friday. It's not pretty. Wow.
No. How old was your patient?
72.
10 years old.
Wow.
So why would a 10-year-old? And these are the type of things they're seeing, these types of cancers evolving. And sadly, when you've got a problem like that, it's children that hit first. So if you look at where there's been like reactor meltdowns like Chernobyl, etc., it's people whose cells are dividing quickly present with the first wave of, the very first thing is people being born, women who've gone through pregnancy in that environment, and people being born with abnormalities. People being born with abnormalities in this environment don't survive.
No.
Because
they're not going to be in the data, are they? No.
No.
Yeah.
So again, this impact of on health from a westernized culture that we've created is really interesting.
And I think even leaving tribal communities aside from the stuff that I've just been interested in and read, we are seeing the term I heard was the global standard diet. In that you can now be in Japan and eat the same cuisine that you might eat in a city in America or, an African capital. So we have this global standard diet that's kind of spreading throughout the world, and right behind it is all the diseases of excess that we know we are now so heavily burdened by.
And also, the other thing that I find really interesting is I don't understand why people think that's okay. If you and I went to the Sahara Desert today and just decided we were just going to crack on and go for a walk, we wouldn't last very long.
No.
And at night, we would be very, very cold. But the people that live there do all right in the day, and they're not very cold at night. Because that's where they live. And their body, their outside body, is adapted, and their physiology is adapted to that environment. But we think it's okay to take a global cuisine and go, well, I'm just going to eat that. Well, your body has a base of what it was created by, like your environment, just the same way as people with fair skin are more likely to burn in the sun and more likely to get melanomas. Why do you not think the same thing would happen on the inside if you switch the diets around? Why do you not think it would have an impact?
But the corporations that make these products have a lot of money, and they're very powerful, and they have political sway. They are the puppet masters a lot of the time. I remember, what year did I do the diabetes diploma? It was probably 10 or 11 years ago. And at that point then, the highest growth for type 2 diabetes was in the Middle East. I remember them saying that the rate at which it had accelerated was almost a vertical line on a graph. And it was the abundance of westernized fast food that's just so powerfully addictive. And it is, whatever way you look at it, this stuff is addictive. And I watched a program about it was about the impact of plastics. It was globally, and on some of the small islands in the Pacific, the impact that these plastics have had. And a lot of it came back to the big soft drink producers, and it went on to talk about their lack of willingness to take responsibility for it. But you put those drinks, like you see, in these communities, this enormous sugary sweet drink, and people can't stay away from it. And the downstream consequences of that, not just for the environment, but for the individual and for health, is huge. It's huge.
It's devastating. I mean, it's really sad that we've got huge drives to save the rainforest. We've got huge drives to ensure that the Serengeti remains a plain for animals and et cetera, et cetera. And don't get me wrong, they're really important. Really, really, really important. But we don't seem to put the importance on and go, actually, no, there's a complete ban on any of that crap going to Africa. We're not going to allow corporations to profit from poisoning people. Learn by our mistakes. It's incredibly sad. But and then of course the corporations come back and they go, it's free will.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said that in an American accent. I don't know why that suddenly happened.
I wonder what bit of your subconscious made you think of America. Yeah.
So I still think I learned huge amounts. I learned about how the perception of illness and disease makes a massive difference in the outcome. And the perception of disability in the psychological aspect, their ability to, so for example, the guy with the heart failure, he couldn't conceptualize not going for a walk, so he just went for a walk, and he walked up a mountain. Now I'm not discrediting anybody who's got heart failure in the UK or in the Western world, or saying that it's not terrifying when you can't breathe. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that the power of the mind, Daniel hasn't got the anxiety that's created by society. So I'm not saying it's not the anxiety isn't real. It's incredibly real for people. But I sometimes think that we are driven by the fear of something rather than just going, I'm just going to do it. And, when you look at extreme athletes, you talk about, Goggins and people like that, their mentality is, I just go and do it. You're the limit is the mind, not the body.
Well, it sounds like he fundamentally doesn't see himself as sick.
Correct. He doesn't accept the medical model.
Yeah. Whereas what we appear to be doing, and I'll resist the statin rant, but it's bubbling beneath the surface, is we are desperate to make patients out of people.
Yeah.
Again, because wider forces perhaps have got a bigger sway in this, but we take people who could still be considered quite well, and we test them and we look for things, and we're desperate to make them into patients, and then that has a downstream effect on people's mindset, and the fear kicks in, and and the machine kicks into action. And I, in my experience, it seems to be around midlife, where the path divides. And certainly, I think that, I'm trying to reach people with my messaging, perhaps, that you can resist this. But interesting. I think it also brings home how much we take for granted. And I know that's difficult not to, because the pace of life and you tick over. But I'm thinking about when I've worked for, 111 and out of hours, and the type of things that people ring with, because they don't know how to make sense of their symptoms, and the contrast between your message from somebody who, 111 would have sent an ambulance for the pulse alone in that situation without asking any more questions.
No.
And that feeds into part of why we struggle with ambulance response times, because of the lack of a good filter for what really needs it. But
I think the other thing is, the sun sets and the stars come out. I mean, there's no lights. So, I have to say I slept incredibly. When I was asleep, it was incredibly peaceful. And from a sleep perspective, it is tranquil. And you are, and I know this sounds really quite twee, but you are in the moment, and because there's no other distraction. There was no telly. There's nothing. So you either sit and talk, or you're in nothing. You are in the moment of peace. Apart from the apes in the jungle and the noises and all of those, not in the jungle, in the forest, and et cetera. Like I sent you that video of when I went for a walk. So I went for a walk. I know. So I wasn't in a game park. I just went for a walk, and I'm just walking along in my own world, and there's a ripple in the water, and I'm like, so I get my camera out, and this huge hippo bull just surfaces and lets out this huge snort, just minding his own business. And it's like, we just don't capture that. We lose that in everyday life.
Wow.
Something to think about.
Yeah, amazing. Brill.
Well,
what I might do for anybody that is watching this, I'll just overlay some of the photographs that you sent me.
Yeah, sure.
For context, because if anybody's watching it on YouTube, it puts, a picture tells 1,000 words.
Absolutely. And then go and look up the RedTribe project. So the RedTribe project, I'll put in a link as well for Henny and Becca, who are the people that run it out there, and their journey of moving out there with 3 young children and not even having anywhere to live really when they moved.
Yeah, has Ben Fogle not found them and got them on his?
Well, I mean, did they? So the link that I'll send you is a Channel 4 documentary that was done about them. It was done 10 years ago, but oh my goodness, you look at that and you think about risk and how we are with our children. I'm a very, my children have led what I consider to be a very adventurous life. Oh My children have been really, really wrapped in bubble wrap compared to these kids. Really? Off the scale. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to give that a watch, definitely, for a bit more context. Yeah. Cool. Great. Looking forward to the next chat. Cool.
Yes. Look forward to it.